Welcome to Connecting Hearts Conversations. My name is Ann Vlahos, your host and best-selling author of To Die For, The Gifts of Being Present Through Loss and Grief. Today, we are joined by Linda Fostek, the crisis planner. Welcome, Linda.
I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you. Well, Linda asks us to get off the worry-go-round. She's an international speaker, a best-selling author, and also a planning consultant. Linda facilitates recovery, avoids family conflicts, and controlling chaos through personal or natural disaster plans with her comprehensive tools. As a business and community leader, she has been honored by media and organizations for her very important work. And Linda, you and I met through the Women's Prosperity Network, and I was so grateful for that. So thank you so much for joining us.
I'm so glad to be here. This is really an honor. And it was so delightful to meet you at the Unconference this year.
Yeah, well, we exchanged books, and I got to tell you, your book "And Now What" was what really triggered the need in me to have a conversation with you. I think when we talk with people about loss and grief, which is the area that I'd like to focus on today, they are really lost at that very first step, and that very first step could be planning or with a loss. And so today I'd like to kind of ask you, like, what inspired you to actually write that book and get involved?
Well, actually, I was inspired by something my father had started when he turned 70. And literally, he saw so many of his friends losing a spouse, and the one that was left in total chaos. So, you know, what would happen is the kids would swoop in from all over the country. They'd pick up mom or dad, relocate them to someplace that they had no intention of ever being. And 6 months later, the parent was going, this wasn't my plan. But they didn't have a plan, and they didn't they didn't communicate what they wanted. So they ended up someplace that they didn't intend to be. So my father said, well, how did this happen, and why did this happen? He was an engineer. He always was trying to find solutions to problems. And he wrote a book called The ABCs of Home Operation, because he felt that he had seen that the husband didn't know how to run the washing machine, the wife didn't know how to write a check. So he said, okay, I'm going to solve all those problems. I'm going to, put everything down in a book so everyone knows how to do it. And but it was written like an engineer. It looked like something an engineer put together, and he had no idea what to do with it. So it sat on a shelf for 23 years.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. And the comment that you made is they didn't have a plan. And what I try to help people understand is if you don't have a plan, that is your decision. And that is your plan, to not have a plan. And so I think probably what would help a little bit too is if we talk about a story where the lack of, I know that you work with tons of people helping with plans and without plans to create them, and also to kind of come in afterwards to help to create clarity out of the chaos. Could you tell us a story where the lack of a plan caused a particular problem that this pre-planning could assuage?
Well, certainly. I have a friend who actually lost both of her parents within 30 days of each other. And one of the deaths was totally unexpected. The other, her father had been ailing for a while, but they really didn't expect him to pass either. And they had nothing in place. None of the legal documents were in place. Their 4 children were scattered all over, and all of the weight of creating some sort of a, the funeral and all the memorial and all this stuff fell on the children, who had no idea what their parents wanted.
Wow.
And it caused a lot of arguments. It caused a lot of stress that was so unnecessary. Because if the parents had any kind of documents in place, it would have simplified everything for the kids. And if they had communicated what their wishes were, did they want to be cremated? Did they want to be buried? Where did they want to be buried?
Yeah.
What kind of service did they want? And the children were arguing with each other over it. And finally, one of them just said, look, we're just going to do this, and that's it. And of course, nobody was happy.
Right.
And that is the trauma that you're put through when there is no plan. The people who are gone are already gone. the people that are left are the ones that are left with the mess.
Yeah, for sure. So out of curiosity, how long did it take until until they were able to fully resolve the estate?
Well, the estate is still not resolved completely because there was no will in place. So it has to go through probate, and all of that takes time. There was nobody assigned to be the executor. You know, they had none of their legal documents in place.
Mm.
So it's like, you know, so now it's in the hands of the state and the resolving the estate that way. I mean, it's not the best way to go, believe me. And it could have been so simple. And the really sad part is the woman had bought the And Now What book for her parents and asked them to put everything down for her like 3 months before this happened, and the parents never got around to it. And the around to it is the thing I think that happens to most people.
Yeah, I think that's a subject of a whole nother conversation, right? That's so valid. And so obviously, you know, you've seen places where this has worked out really well. So can you share a story from that perspective? Lighten up a little bit, right?
Yeah, well, from my own perspective, actually, I lost my husband 20 months ago, and he had been disabled for 8 years. And as the crisis planner, the two of us had numerous conversations about what his wishes were, what he wanted. He had all his legal documents in place. He had his funeral prepaid for. He had even spoken to the minister as far as what readings were going to be done at his memorial. He wanted it to be a celebration of his life. And it really allowed me to create that celebration, I mean, of who he was and what he had accomplished and what he had done in his lifetime. And it took all of that stress and strain off of me. And it really allowed me to celebrate the life that we had together. So it was a completely different experience. And, you know, my friends watched me and through the whole thing, and they said, God, this just seems so seamless. And it was seamless because there was a plan in place.
Yeah, I can understand that. That's a beautiful story. And so, you know, my heart goes out to you on your loss, but I also think that you're a poster child for how to put this in place so that you can actually focus on your emotions and your feelings, right? Because that's the key thing that most people, you know, they almost put that aside because there's so much to do that then they don't allow themselves to go through the grieving process. And I think that maybe is what extends the grief process and some anxiety as well too.
It absolutely extends the grieving process and actually makes it even more difficult because you're not only grieving the loss, but you're grieving the chaos. You know, it's like, makes everything so much worse. So it definitely is something that we have control over, and it can happen in an instant. It doesn't have to be somebody who's sick or elderly. I mean, a car accident can happen, things can happen. And, you know, I think one of the things that I learned, which really surprised me, is, you know, once a child becomes 18, if you do not have like a healthcare proxy and advanced directives in place and a power of attorney, the parent has no legal rights to make any medical decisions for that adult child.
Wow. Yeah.
And it can be very frightening. They won't even tell you about their medical conditions if you want to talk to somebody about it without those documents in place. So it's something that, I mean, death is something that we're all going to face at some time. We just don't know when our appointment is, so to speak. But it affects everybody at all ages, and you really need to have those advanced directives in place. It's so important.
Yeah, you're right. You know, my dad used to say, you know, death or birth is a terminal illness. He's never seen anyone get out alive. And when I was in my 20s and 30s, I thought that was awfully pessimistic. But on the other hand, you know, he's correct. And I think that reality and knowing that is the thing that, you know, is good. Even with that, my mom and dad had a low level of documents in place when things started happening with my mom, enough to, you know, the healthcare proxy and those kinds of things were all in place. But and a will. But when my father passed away, it was so much more so organized, and it wasn't as well documented as what your dad had done or your husband, but it was extremely helpful. And it was that literally, it was a guide to walk through it, and it made it so much easier for me, where everything was, what was what. And there, of course, there was the things to do, taking care of, emptying out the house and the mechanics of it, but what had to be done was very clear, and the intent of it was very clear, and it was extremely helpful. It allowed me to very much more process what I was going through.
And allowed you to do it knowing that you were doing what your parents would have wished for.
Yeah.
And I think that there's comfort in that. It's like when you question, would mom want this? Or is this really, when they clearly tell you what they want, it just makes such a difference.
Yeah, it's right there. So for those that are just, brave enough to watch the video, but haven't taken that first step, how did they begin the process? Like, what would your recommendations?
Well, you can certainly consult with an attorney to get the advance directives in place. And, there's really 4 key documents that you need to have. That's your will, your power of attorney, your healthcare proxy, and your living will. Now, each of those serves an important function, and they're fairly simple and straightforward. They shouldn't cost a tremendous amount of money. There's a lot of different options for getting the basic ones done. I know an end-of-life doula that actually can do advance directives, that are very specific in your living will and your healthcare proxies. But you want to have those documents done and filed, and you want to make sure that your family members have a copy, know that you have them in place, and communicate with them what your wishes are. It's a hard conversation. It's a conversation that a lot of people are very uncomfortable with, but it's important to know what your loved ones would want, because otherwise what happens is the children end up fighting and they never talk to each other again, and no parent wants that to happen with within their family. Mm-hmm. They don't want to think that their children are not speaking to each other because they couldn't agree on what mom and dad wanted.
Right. Because we each have our own different relationships with our parents, right? So the perspective is quite different.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody doesn't have the financial means to be able to visit a lawyer, are there like online resources or, like low cost legal resources that could help with this?
Absolutely. You can, as part of, LegalZoom, you can always do documents fairly inexpensively. Legal Shield will actually, as a member of Legal Shield, which allows you to talk to an attorney on it's kind of like you pay a monthly fee of like $20 a month. And as part of that program, you can have a will done and your advance directives done with that. So that's very inexpensive. And, I know a number of people that have done that. And, and any time you have a change in, something in the family, somebody passes away, somebody's born, you really need to look at your documents again, revise them, because, say there's a divorce and you had given part of your estate to that would have gone to that person. You want to make sure that your documents are updated on a regular basis. So, just because you did your documents 20 years ago, there could have been a lot of changes in your family in that 20 years. And maybe some of your beneficiaries are no longer alive and new beneficiaries have been born. So it's important to kind of keep track of that. And that's one of the things that I advocate, is having what I call an ICE file, your in case of emergency file. Mm-hmm. And where you have those documents in one place that you can actually access them when you need them. And then you're going to make sure that you give copies to the people that need to have copies of them, whether that be your children, or, if you don't have any children, it may be a sibling or, somebody. I mean, personally, after my husband passed, I was going on a trip that August, and it was going to be one of those things that was doing a high ropes course and sleeping with wolves and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And I said, before I go, I wanted to have all my documents updated because my husband had passed away. I had everything done. I made sure my sister had all the copies that she needed of everything. And I could go without worrying about anything because I knew everything was taken care of. And that, having those documents is so comforting for the living, so that so that you really can get off the worry-go-round, because you worry about all the what-ifs of life. But if you know you've taken care of the things that you need to take care of, you stop worrying about it.
Yeah, I remember, my dad had he worked with an estate lawyer to do things, and there was a binder. It must have been, I don't know, 3-4 inches thick, and it was I just remember this distinctly. It was in a really nice canvas bag, and he said, okay, I want you to know where this is, here it is. It's always there. And he said, honestly, it's totally okay if you pull it out and read it. I can tell you anything that you want. These are the important pages. I've put a Post-it on them so you understand, and this is what you should do. And there was a part of me that was just like, gods, but I had already lost my mom, so I was very much welcoming this, because I was like, okay, you took care of it mostly last time. I wasn't that present for that process, so I need to know. And it was very helpful. So for me, that's how we approached it together. But how do you encourage aging family members to talk about this and to begin this, because it is really associated more with that fear. So what are you using as your tools to help coach people to move forward with this, and also to convey this?
Well, basically the people that I talk to the most directly are baby boomers. And the reason that I focused particularly on boomer women, because we are the caregivers. We're the ones that are taking care of our aging parents. We may have had some of our own health issues, or a spouse that has some health issues. So we're very keenly aware of the fact that there needs to be a plan in place. And when I talk to them, I say, when you fill out your Now What book, you want to make sure that you also get copies for your parents and your in-laws and your siblings, and just share with them how it was so comforting to put all that stuff down in one place and know that everything was together. And I got one for you too. And all you need to do is fill it out and tell me where to find it. Just like your dad told you about the binder, you knew where to find it. This is a simple book. It's not overwhelming. It's not like this huge, humongous thing that you have to fill out, but it helps you organize the documents, put everything together, and then tell people where to find it. The only thing that you really have to share with your loved ones is if you have a long-term care policy. And that's probably the saddest story that I have actually encountered, where a family where the father had dementia and Alzheimer's, and they kept him home as long as they could, and they spent all the money that he had, and finally he had to go into a nursing home, and they turned the house over to Medicaid. And because nursing homes cost $15,000 a month. And when he passed away several months later, that's when you have to clean out the house and sell the house. So they're cleaning out the house, and they're safely tucked in a bottom drawer. They found a long-term care policy that not only would have saved the house, but all the money they had spent for his care. But remember, he had it. He hadn't told anybody he had it, and they didn't know to look for it. So,
oh my goodness. And it couldn't be retroactive then either, huh?
It's after the fact. So
wow.
They lost everything because they didn't know. So It's so important to share that kind of information with your family, to have these difficult conversations, because they can be very difficult conversations. The kids don't want to think about losing mom or dad, but and mom and dad don't want to think of leaving, but it's something that it is a conversation that can actually be very liberating once you have it.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. I find it approaches a subject, and I also coach people that, when you even talk about what your wishes are and trying to get that discussion clarified, is, you can take advantage of any situations that are out there. somebody famous dies and, you see the big hullabaloo they have, or you see the fight over the estate, or, you use that as an opportunity to have a tiny bit of a discussion. Or when a friend's parents pass away, you again, same thing, right?
Well, and you think about celebrities like Prince and Aretha Franklin did not have any will in place. Those estates are going to be in litigation for 10 years or more before they're. So do you want your loved ones to have to go through that? Now, granted, I'm not at the status of a Prince or Aretha Franklin or any of these other celebrities, but would you want your loved ones to have to spend 10 years to resolve something?
Right.
It's selfish not to take care of these things, actually.
I think I totally agree with you. It's part of self-care, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's part of self-care. So are there any other resources that you might recommend people looking into? I mean, we talked a little bit about some of the online resources, but anything else that might be helpful things to think about?
Well, you can certainly, I just recently launched the home system, the Crisis Planner home system, and the last two books of that system actually are expanded versions of the Now What book. So they can get those books online. The book number 4 actually goes through the 8 steps of creating a plan. And that includes your financial, your insurance, your legal, your tax planning, your banking planning, your protection of your identity, and your computer backups and all that stuff. But it's 8 steps that you put together, and that explains a little bit more of that. And then the ICE book, which is book number 5, that's where you put all your medical information, your contact information, all the different account numbers and everything else. So everything is clearly put in one place. So that's another resource that I have. I also have, if they go to my website, some free downloads, some checklists, a disaster kit checklist, your ICE checklist, which is your in case of emergency file checklist, and a free crisis planner roadmap, which again walks you through those 8 steps. So there's a lot of different resources out there, and there's organizations that actually can support people in identifying resources to help them. National Aging in Place Council is one that is a national organization that has a lot of resources available to seniors. And your local municipalities frequently will have senior resource centers that you can tap into to get the resources that you need. And they can guide you to some lower cost options for some of these planning services as well.
Oh, that's great. Well, now might be a really good time to advise how people can get in touch with you, because there's a lot of nuggets of gold right there that you just said. Can you give us your website and contact information, please?
Okay, well, my website is thecrisisplanner.com, and they can reach me via email at Linda Fostek at thecrisisplanner.com, and that's Fostek. So a lot of people want to make me a Foster, but I'm a Fostek.
Okay, there you go. And we're also going to have a list of your website and your books underneath. And your books are now available on Amazon, I assume?
They're on Amazon, and all of the services and things that I offer are also available on my website. And I have a lot of other things that I do work with, things from Carbonite to Legal Shield and ID Shield, and something that does DNA testing for medications to see whether the medication will hurt you. So there's some interesting things on my website.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. This was just an amazing conversation. I think these very practical conversations are a very important part of dealing with loss and grief, because it allows us to get to that point. So, what you've offered here today is, I'm sure, just the beginning of a great runway for a lot of people to approach this for themselves. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was my pleasure.
All right, great. Well, thanks to Linda, and also thank you to you, our viewers, for joining us on Connecting Heart Conversations. We take on this a very tough subject, and we break it down for you and try to make it easier so that your path through loss and grief will be a little bit easier. So sending love from our hearts to yours. Thank you so much for joining us.